Welcome back to the Anti-Meta Club. This week we have our very first Group 2 race since I started making these guides, and I'm kind of surprised by what the meta car is. Let's get into it. This is the one track that I expected the GTR not to be the meta car. I think in every single other track it's going to be the GTR or the NSX, but I was surprised. So I went ahead and set what was the fastest CLK time. That has been beaten by Damien, but I'm still pretty proud of this lap. You can see almost every single other position is the GTR though. When this car was added to the game, I think we were all really surprised to see it placed in the Group 2 class, and of course it completely dominated the class. After receiving a heavy nerf, it is now just kind of competitive, so it was a really good choice for the anti-meta car this week. I wanted to start early so you can see how much of the chicane you can really just kind of monster truck over, and I like to use third gear so we don't have to waste time shifting up to third. Like always, to start all the way on the left so we can get a really good angle coming into the first little bend, but not all cars need that, just a note. Making sure you're entirely off the curb before you start braking and turning in, you want to brake right before the total sign on the right. Pay very close attention to the fact that I'm putting my right tires on the very inside of this curb as I'm turning left. And I'm doing the opposite with my left tires on the inside of this right-hand curb. And we're going to try to focus on getting just a really good exit from there in third gear and using as much of the curb on exit as possible. As is usually the case with corners such as that, the second exit is the most important. This next braking point is incredibly hard to see. There's a very, very faint mark on the track, but also when you see the wall on the left disappear from your view in this view, that's when you can start braking. You want to turn in, trail brake, and apex very early on this, but continue turning left after you hit it. You want to turn in as early as you possibly can without hitting that bollard. Sometimes if you hit the curb strangely, you might bounce, and don't be afraid to lift off the throttle just to make sure you don't go off the track here because that will end your lap. There's some very convenient tire marks that you can look for, but also the blue portion of the track on the outside just a few feet after that starts is a good place to brake. Notice that I'm only using about 50% brake pressure. The brakes on this corner are more for getting weight over the front tires rather than slowing the car down. Once again, I urge you to abuse the track limits as much as you possibly can. And on the exit, you can go all the way onto the curb, but you must get back on the inside of the white line before the curb ends. This should be pretty obvious, but on these really long straights, it's really important not to steer very much. You can actually hug the inside here, you're not going to lose too much speed, but if you find yourself weaving all over the track or changing positions too much, you're going to end up losing a lot of speed. It will add up in the end. I don't usually do this, but let's fast forward because these straights are crazy long. Approaching the end of the fence on the left, we're going to look for those bright orange marshals and then the 100 meter board on the left. I try to stay off the outside part of the track until I'm about to brake, and I brake right before the 100 meter board. We're going to stay hard on the brakes, get to third, and we're going to abuse the track limits as much as we can. It's important to use as much of the track as they allow us to do. I get to second just to rotate the car, and on exit, I go straight for the curbing. You'll see on the next chicane, it's going to be a little bit different. We're going to fast forward one more time because there's really not a lot to think about or do on the straights. As long as you don't steer too much, don't weave your car, you'll be fine. Fun fact, I once braked 200 meters early while I was leading an FIA manufacturer's race in top split. Make sure you pay attention to these trees because they can really blend in, and look for your braking point. 100 meter board is our braking point, but we can be a little bit more brave braking just past it. This chicane is really just the opposite of the first chicane, however the exit limits are a lot more sensitive. The one thing I try to do is make sure I don't cross the exit white line until I'm at the curb. I actually did this time, but it must have been just late enough not to activate the penalty. I couldn't tell you exactly where the line is, but as long as you stay on the inside of that white line, you should be safe. Okay, once again, we're going to fast forward. The next corner you have to slow down a lot, and it leads to a very long straight, so it's incredibly important that you get a good exit. Staying close to the inside, notice the bend in the curb right here. Aiming just past the brown house in the distance, we want a straight line all the way to the outside part of the track, get all the way to first gear, and turn in with just enough space that we don't bounce over the inside part of the curb. You can use all of the exit here. As long as you're on the tarmac, you're going to be safe, but that curb is slippery, so be really careful when you're getting on the throttle. I use second gear, but I think third gear might also work. We're going to fast forward through this part again because it is the last really straight portion of the track, but there are two little kinks. You don't have to go wide for those at all. You can just stay tight to the inside of the track. Position yourself on the outside, but not all the way past the white line. And when you turn in, we're going to brake right before the end of this curb, making sure you don't go over it. You will get a penalty. Keep braking hard while you position yourself for the left. We want to turn in before the end of that outside curbing, and if you hit this curb weird, it can bounce you. Sometimes I'll use first gear to rotate, but I always exit in second or third gear. Get yourself quickly to the left side of the track. We're going to look for this 50-meter board on the left side of the fence. We're going to brake really hard, and we're going to get all the way down to first gear. Now, we want to make sure that we're hitting this apex, but if you use too much of the curb, it's really high on the inside, and it'll bounce you right off the track. Get to second gear and use this exit curb, but it can be slippery, so be really careful getting on the throttle. Coming up next are the infamous Porsche curves, and you can actually get past here by a GT500 car if you're not quite quick enough, so make sure you're really studying up on how to be fast through here and practice it a lot when you're doing your laps. Looking for the 100-meter board on the left, that's going to indicate for us that we then can see this blue sign up here on the left. The blue sign is actually our braking point. I like to brake right past it. We're only going to downshift to 5th gear, and we're going to be really patient as we turn in. We want to maintain as much speed as we possibly can, so you don't need to sacrifice the exit on this corner. Get on the throttle early, and just try to steer yourself to the middle of the track. Turning in at the beginning of the grass on the left, I want you to notice that I don't lift all the way off the throttle when I lift. I just lift enough to make sure that I don't hit the outside wall when I get back on the throttle. Lift to get yourself positioned to the middle of the track at the exit of that curb, but then before the red sign, hit the brakes just gently and just enough so you can tuck yourself in and stay really close to the inside of this right-hand corner. Right before the third red sign on the right, we're going to turn in and lift using as much of the curb as we possibly can again, and get on the throttle as early as you can. You can use, again, this exit curb as long as you get back within the bounds of the white line before it ends. One of the hard parts about this track is it's super long, and the hardest part of it is the very end. I put most of my car in the pit entry lane, and I brake about 3/4 of the way through it. If you use too much of the curb on the outside as you turn in, it can bounce you, so be really careful with that. But you do want to be brave with your speed entering this, and you want to keep up your speed as you go through this final chicane section. The key is to abuse the track limits as much as you possibly can, steering as little as you can, especially in the final portion. You're going to pretty much be a monster truck as you go almost straight through the last part of the curbs. Stay in third gear, be really careful on the throttle on exit, and try not to slide because it's really easy to ruin your entire lap at the very end. And I've done it hundreds of times over the years. All right, that's my lap. We're going to go over it in full speed now. Starting out all the way on the left, like I said before, some cars you don't actually need to. This one, you really should. You can go over the curbing at the beginning, but try not to use it when you're braking or turning in because it can really upset the balance of the car and kind of just make you understeer. We're going to really abuse the track limits on every single part of this track, so make sure that you're using every little bit of the curb as you can, especially in that first sector. Don't be afraid to lift on turn-in, and remember that every lift doesn't have to be a full lift. Using the brakes just enough so you can get the car tucked into the corner, we want to get on the throttle as early as we can, and as long as you get back within the bounds of the white lines before the end of the curb, you're going to be fine. Again, we're going to fast forward through this part of the track. Instead of skipping forward, I want to fast forward so you can really get used to the scenery because it's really easy to get lost and forget that you need to brake. After we see those marshals, we're going to get down to third gear, use as much of the track. I know I keep saying that, but it's really important. You have to really abuse the track limits to get the most out of it. When I was leading from pole position in that race I was talking about earlier, I caused the most massive pileup. It was actually really hilarious. I've befriended the people whose races I've ruined though, so it's really kind of funny. This is really a repeat of the last chicane, but the exit is a lot more sensitive. Try to stay within the bounds of the white line until you get that exit curb. If you didn't have ABS, or if you had a car that did have ABS but was still kind of sketchy under braking, then you'd want to go all the way to the left to set up for this corner. But since this car has Magic Gran Turismo ABS, you don't really have to. It'll just waste time. Don't be afraid to get down to first gear, and when you exit, be really careful that you don't slip out. It will most likely just cost you a little bit more time rather than saving you time from not steering as much if you go really wide for these kinks, so just stay close to the inside. Going over this first inside curb is an instant penalty, and the inside curb on the left here can make you bounce, so be real careful on it. Looking for the 50-meter board on the left above the fence, we're going to brake right before it, and again, the inside of this curb can be really bouncy, so try not to use all of it. Sliding out or drifting on the exit there can cost you a lot of time, so make sure that you're really careful on the throttle. Like I was saying before, the Porsche curves are a really dangerous part of the track when you're using the non-meta car. The GT500 cars are so much faster through here that you can actually lose a position to them. They can pass you pretty easily here, especially if you're not going super fast. So make sure you're doing as much as you can to learn how to go really fast through this section so you don't lose any positions here. It's really important to hug the right on this little right-hander here because this next exit is the most important part of it. If you get a bad run out of here, it's also easy to lose a position to one of the GT500 cars going up to this next sector, and they'll definitely beat you through the chicane and the entire first sector of the next lap. The final double chicane is probably the hardest part of the track, which is really unfortunate because it's at the very end and you can really easily throw away your lap here. Make sure you just act like a monster truck on the last part of the chicane and you should be fine. So we started from the back, or at least we tried to. We didn't have a qualifying time, but our DR put us close to the top of the list of the people who weren't starting with a quali time. I found with the longer tracks, a lot of times it seems like people can't quite put together a really good lap, and so they'd rather just start from the back, or maybe they actually just really can't put together a lap, and so they have no choice but to start from the back. Either way, since we weren't in the meta car, I just accepted it. It's fine starting from 12th position. It's a little bit less impressive going from 12th to 1st than 16th to 1st, but it was still a good challenge. A challenge I was currently losing because Damien was able to get one position ahead in a really important place while I was stuck behind this driver who wasn't quite up to our pace. They were also in the same car, but Damien and I had been a little bit quicker in it. Trying to defend as well as hoping to get a sneaky slipstream from someone who might move out of line. It didn't quite work, so I moved back behind the Mercedes because I knew in slip I was going to be able to pull away from that Lexus. Damien did move over to try to give me the slipstream, but the other Mercedes picked it up quicker, but I was pretty confident I could brake later than this guy, so I moved back on the inside. I was really confident with the brakes of this car, and I didn't expect that guy to stop so early, but it all worked out really perfectly. The ghosting is kind of a controversial thing. If you saw, he kind of drove straight into me, or straight through me, and that's because the game has been automatically ghosting people in certain situations. That's something that happens more often in lower SR and DR lobbies, but it also happens on certain tracks just because I guess PD probably looks at the data and realizes how often people get into car accidents in this specific track. Realizing there were already 3 wide, I decided just to be careful and try to stay as close as I could and get a really good exit here. I did manage to get a really nice exit compared to the GT500 behind me, but it wasn't quite enough to make a move just yet. Despite the GT500 being faster overall, a CLK and its slipstream can definitely get past it. I was really lucky that right as I moved to the side of that GT500, the 2 cars in front also moved right in front of me, so it was a pretty easy pass right then. This is another corner where cars automatically ghost. It's weird because they don't always ghost, but as you can see, King Ghidorah went straight into me, and nothing happened. There was no real indication that we were going to collide before. I think he knew it was going to happen, and so he just went ahead and got on the throttle, and we didn't really have anything to worry about. I personally don't really like not needing to give each other space because it kind of takes the fun out of racing side by side, but if it can save a race and make it so I don't just get punted there, then I guess I'll take it. And I was really surprised because I completely missed my braking point, completely missed my turn-in point, and I was still overtaken on the outside by King Ghidorah right there. Now, I race with him all the time. I'm certain he didn't mean to do that, which is why he automatically pulled over and gave me the spot back. It was pretty sketchy seeing that Lexus pull up real quick, but it looked like I didn't have anything to worry about. They had a penalty, and so I was able to maintain the positions that I just took. Now, it can be really sketchy going into the Porsche curves with any of the GT500 cars behind. However, it can be extra sketchy if you expect a slower car or dirty air in front of you, because that's going to make it even harder to keep up a good enough pace to not get overtaken by the more nimble cars behind. Even cleanly being in front of both of the cars behind, they're so nimble that by the time we get to the end of the Porsche curves, they're going to be right on my bumper. And this is the hardest test for the CLK on this track. This part of the track, the chicane, and the first sector of the next lap are going to be the hardest parts to get in front or stay in front of any of the GT500 cars. The chicane is incredibly difficult just in general, and adding dirty air to the mix makes it much more stressful. Try not to have too much steering angle over these curbs. You can really steer afterwards as long as you get a really good angle coming out of them. I didn't want to move over and pit myself on the Lexus behind, so I didn't quite have enough of a gap to get in front of Miller on the inside, so I tried to go on the outside. That way, if the Lexus tried to dive bomb too, I should be safe. I hadn't really planned it like this, but since Miller took that weird approach there, I was able to get up right next to him, and the superior grip of the CLK made it so I was able to get past him, especially since he slipped on that outside curb. Now, as long as you're safely in front of these guys and you don't get punted off, you should be able to stay in front of a GT500 car as long as you get a really good exit here. Even if they beat you onto the straight here, you're going to have a lot more top speed and acceleration, so it's going to be hard for them to stay in front of you by the next braking point. If they can get a slipstream from someone that's a little bit ahead, then they can stay in front of you. So even if you have to sacrifice your run, if you just stay right behind any car that's in front, they won't be able to have enough slipstream to get in front of you. And when their momentum dies out, you can then move for a move on whatever car you were just following. Just a thought. The GT500s will also brake a lot later than you can in the CLK, so be really careful of anyone who's following directly behind you. It might even be a good idea to move away from being right in front of someone right before the braking zone, so if they do end up braking later than you, then they can go past you and they won't just ruin both of your races. Luckily, since those two were fighting behind, they didn't get nearly the same exit we did, so we can focus on trying to overtake the guy in front. And at first, I was a little upset at the weaving, and I realized it's a buddy of ours. So when friends weave, they're really just saying hi. They're not trying to lose the slipstream. So I was like, hey, what? That's fine. That's fine. It was actually perfect and probably in both of our interests to let me get ahead right here, because going on to that next straight, he can get right behind me and keep up a higher top speed than if he were by himself. Going into this corner, if there's a GT500 car that's trying to outbrake you and pass you here, go ahead and just let them, because the next straight's so long that you'll just pass them immediately. Or if not immediately, definitely by the next actual corner. Unfortunately, this is recording from a replay. It wasn't the live version, so you can't see the delta between myself and 5th place. You can see, however, that Damien, who was in front of me at the very beginning of the race, only one position ahead, is now in 2nd place. There are 3 cars between myself and him, so in the time it took me to get up to 6th place, he is already in 2nd. I was fairly convinced that I was going to get 2nd to him if I was able to get past the rest of these guys, but of course anything can happen in a race, so we just kept going. Like I said before, getting to the Porsche curves with any of these GT500 cars in front, it's going to be really difficult to get in front of them, so if you can get a really good exit there, catch their slipstream, then you might be able to do something before the Porsche curves. I'm guessing right there Child Roland just decided to let me go. They didn't want to risk any kind of weird collisions, because when you take the CLK and the GT500 through here, you're going to be able to battle each other. The GT500 should be faster, but if you have a fast driver in the CLK, then it can get really messy. It's a really dangerous part of the course anyways, and so if people are trying to battle there, things can get sketchy. So I do think he just kind of let me go there. So it's appreciated, but I also really like a battle. As I've talked about before, the first sector is definitely in the GT500's favor, so I went ahead and jumped ahead till I was really close to Andre, just about enough space between him and I that I could feel the slipstream. If you can catch a GT500 on the straights, you're probably going to be golden. You can still defend against them going into the handling section, it's just that they're definitely going to have the advantage, so you've got to be really careful and really crafty in how you defend. Now with that said, any of the GT500 cars, even if you do pass them here, a good driver is going to be able to stick with you all the way to the end, and a really good driver is going to actually be able to pass you in the Porsche curves, so you've got to be really wary of that. Now, not much really happened since we were able to catch him on the straight. However, I do want to show you this part of the race because a competent GT driver is going to be able to keep up with you leading up to the next part of the track. And that next part of the track is where all of the twisties begin. And like I keep saying, they'll definitely be able to pass you if you're not really crafty in how you defend, but it does take a pretty special driver to be able to catch up to one of the CLKs if you're driving the CLK really well. One thing you may have noticed is that there aren't a lot of people bump drafting, and I should have mentioned this a lot earlier. One thing we used to get in GT Sport was the SR down and SR up arrows. If an incident occurred or if we had a clean section, then we can see if we got SR up or SR down, and we can start determining if we're going to actually lose SR by the end of the race. Some people discovered early on that if you do any kind of bump drafting, then it's going to make it so you lose your SR, and if you lose enough SR, your DR gets reset too, so be really careful with that. If you're in a race with someone who is bump drafting a lot, you can try to just let them pass, and then hopefully pass them again, and it's even worth sending them a message afterwards in the race chat to say that it's something you shouldn't do this week because you can get an SR down. You may have noticed that Andre is no longer in the rear view, but as we go through this really slow corner right here, you're going to see him creep back up. If he was able to keep up for just that last few corners, then right here, he could be a really big problem. So if you have a really fast GT500 driver, the meta car is still going to be the meta car. It's going to be faster overall. It's going to be faster by itself through the laps. And if they are pretty competent, then they will be able to catch you and put up a fight through this section. Now, I just wanted to show you that part where Andre disappears and then reappears in the rear view again to show you what can happen in that sector and how quickly they can catch back up to you in the Porsche curves, but this is actually an even better example. We had to go almost an entire lap until we started to catch up to MC Herman, who was in the same position, just following Damien a lot closer for the entirety of the lap up until now. So I believe that MC Herman had a penalty, and so you'll be able to see just how closely he can stick to me through the Porsche curbs. I have to admit, I was pretty nervous because in the last race I did with him, he was exactly where he was in that race too, but he put me directly in this wall and continued driving off, so I thought we were going to fight. He did hit me there. I think he was trying to go for a pass, or just not being very careful, who knows, but I was definitely afraid that he was just going to put me in the wall. He ended up hitting me right there too, right as I had to slow down, but it ended up benefiting me more than him, so I was just focused on trying to get through the chicane. But at this point, I definitely thought he was just going to run straight through me. The last time that he was in front of me at this chicane, however, he spun on the very last corner that I keep warning you guys about, and there you go. No more problem. Now we can just focus on Damien. We have one lap, and at this point, I believe he was actually 4 seconds ahead, maybe only 3. I'm jumping ahead almost an entire lap. You'll see that I'm just barely any closer than Damien. And the reason is he made a little bit of a mistake. And Damien, I'm only putting you in this and showing you this because you beat my time. Consider this revenge, Damien. I'm just kidding. Now, this was a really good race, and I got really lucky that Damien made the perfect mistake. He had just enough of a penalty for me to get in front. That's him saying hi. And now here's the thing. Every single time I got to the chicane when I was in front of him, no matter what, he was able to cut a half second out of me just through the final chicane. He's a half second faster than me through the final chicane. So I was nervous, needless to say. At this point, I don't think I had won a race yet, and I definitely hadn't beaten him. So with luck on my side because of that penalty that he got, I just did the very best I could to stay away, and you can see in my rear view, he is not letting up whatsoever. Now, since you can't tell, I'll just tell you, he was about a half second behind. And like I said, just this sequence of 4 corners, he was a half second faster. I don't know if it was dirty air or if he was just checking up so he wouldn't run into the back of me because I did make a mistake there. I was able to seal the deal. That was an awesome race, Damien. With all of that said, I think Damien actually beat me in every single other race we did together that day, but it was a lot of fun, and I feel like I learned a lot when I get to race him. Thank you again for watching my video. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe because I will be making one of these videos every single week.